On March 15th, Zack Snyder absolutely abruptly, without warning or detail, dropped a video of Lord Darkseid's address, in which the reporter performing the role of Snyder's Justice League villain asks in Darkseid's voice to mark the April 28th. 30 dates on the calendar. Snyder accompanied this with the hashtag #FullCycle and ripped society to shreds, right down to rumors that Netflix will buy out Snyder's odes and let the director finish his universe with Ben Affleck, Henry Cavill, and Gal Gadot. What's going on anyway? Snyder's traditional DC craziness at first glance came off without a hitch. It turns out that the director's video announced a 3-day event called SnyderCon. At it, viewers will be shown all of the DC films directed by the director, as well as Q&As, and seemingly bring in celebrity guests, which could be actors. But why has Snyder decided to bring up his league now, at a time when his universe is officially being killed off by James Gunn? Many legitimately believe that this is all for a reason, and that Snyder is trying to give a sign to the studios that he doesn't mind going back to comic book movies, especially since they aren't feeling their best right now. A sign to which studios could Snyder's announced Comic-Con be? Well, let's start with Netflix. We, to our shame, have stopped making news of the Snyder support movement. It hasn't gone anywhere, however, and fans are now running a massive campaign asking streaming service Netflix to buy the rights to Snyder from WB and let Snyder film the Batman, Cyborg, and Justice League 2 soliloquies to finish what they started in 2013. And the tweets are garnering millions of reactions. And not to say the idea isn't popular, because Snyder has already made 2 movies for the service, is filming Rebel Moon, and is sort of sitting on a long-term contract. In terms of these same contracts, the situation in which WB gives the Snyder universe to Netflix is not something impossible. Just 10 years ago, the same thing happened with Jessica Jones and other Defenders. Marvel is currently sharing the rights to the Hulk with Universal. And James Gunn himself has already announced the joint presence of 2 Batmen in FDC, except for Robert Pattinson. The other actor will be released in the Solo. So there's no limit to the idea here either. The modern viewer is familiar with the cartoon universe and will understand why DC has 2 Justice Leagues. The only question is the money Netflix or any other buyer that WB can offer will convince the studio of such an adventure. Could the Snyderverse comic be the bait to show Netflix the popularity of the idea of buying the League? Let's break it down. First of all, without Warner Brothers' involvement, Snyder could not have set up such a Comic-Con, at least because we're talking about the release of Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, and Justice League in the movies, albeit in a limited format and to a narrow audience. You can't just take intellectual property without the threat of ending up in a reformatory, so it was no surprise to either James himself or WB management that the events took place. Moreover, they could have easily banned it, in which case Snyder would have had to communicate with fans, which, as you can easily guess, would have made the events much less viral. On the other hand, it's completely unclear why WB gave the green light for the event. Snyder got the internet up. Thus, in alarm, James Gunn himself wrote a dozen tweets about how the Justice League departure on Netflix was nonsense, and neither streaming nor Snyder himself saw the point of it. Zack has apparently put the situation behind him and should actively promote his rebellious moon. Star Wars, according to Netflix. Why would he have a Justice League event in the middle of a promotional campaign for one project? Oh, and the competitors from HP who came out on the streaming service. It's incomprehensible. And you can quite build theories that Snyder thus wants to slyly support the fans, give them hope, and run a flywheel of hype to Netflix or Gunn himself to convince them to continue his universe. Admittedly, the Warner Brothers themselves, amid the agonizing reboot of their universe, can hardly be burning with the desire to once again remind millions of fans of the existence of an epic, logical, and cool Justice League, or an injustice that could have been quietly continued. James Gunn should be hysterical because he can't even forgive The Rock for leaving. As it stands, his plans do not compare with the potential return of Snyder, and the League's release in theaters, albeit limited, will bring this topic back into the info poll, and poor Gunn will have to fend off questions again. Why not Ben Affleck, but some Timothée Chalamet in a movie with the meme title, Brave and the Brave? All in all, there's no contradiction in what version, and yet a solid performance of snapper codes WB gave out, and Netflix, for its part, gave Snyder the go-ahead for the rival streaming services project. Does this mean the studios are probing the ground and want to look at the popularity of the event? What to decide? Unfortunately, the likelihood of such an outcome is slim to none. The League is still coming back, not to all theaters, but only the one where SnyderCon takes place. And it's more likely that WB, for their part, is just trying to appease the public by putting the Snyder story behind them. And Netflix, for its part, is happy to have the director back in the infomercial. After all, along with the articles about SnyderCon, people will also learn that Snyder is now filming Rebel Moon, and ratings for the upcoming film will go up. And yet the questions, as they say, remain first and foremost, where is this all? We remember how the studio hid the very fact of Snyder the Cat for 3 years, then refused to release it for another year, and only after a massive fan action agreed to give the director a second chance. It's not hard to guess that during the SnyderCon, the director of the Cool Twists of Justice League 2 Inches teaser will hint that he doesn't mind working on it, and as if casually sighing and saying, well, it's impossible now. After which the WB bosses will start pressing again, and it's possible that there will be attacks on the James Gunn movie ratings from radical Snyder fans. By all accounts, WB should legacy the director, maybe? And if the studio doesn't, then there's something we don't know. There is a theory on the internet about how Gary Snyder and his team might resolve the controversy in Justice League in Flashpoint. Many believe that the filmmakers agreed with each other while they were still working on Flashpoint. Miller's Ezra film will be finished by Snyder, giving him back the credibility he deserves. According to the theory, Snyder's Justice League will officially be recognized as the director's own canon. They will call for the premiere of Flashpoint and acknowledge his merits, thus putting a fat point before the subsequent DC reboot. Well, the re-release of The League in cinemas will symbolize the recognition of its canon and promotional campaign Flashpoint, in which Snyder will be actively involved. In fact, this theory is slim enough, at least both sides will benefit. Snyder will finally get rid of the image of a rogue director riveting projects for streaming services. He will be returned to the red carpet, they say, of merit and, traditionally, promise to consider future collaborations. On the other hand, the story will be set in stone, and he will leave for Netflix, bringing the streaming service extra hype with his return. In all media, James Gunn will finally reconcile with at least some of the fans and somehow justify the very dubious idea of restarting an entire universe to employ his wife. Well, WB in the background will make money from both the re-rental of The League and the inevitable rise in popularity of Flashpoint. Personally, I'd like to believe in this option because it's the only one that's real. Snyder is definitely not announcing Justice League 2 on his screwdriver in April. Unfortunately, we don't live in the world of unicorns and magic where such contrivances are possible. The most realistic event looks to be a fan event where Henry Cavill and Ben Affleck will be invited and talk about old times. Other than that, minus the fan cries, for about 3 years, things will remain the same. We'd all be better off if DC came to at least some semblance of harmony, measured fans and directors, and finally admitted the obvious mistake of firing Snyder in his day. The coolest option in general seems to be the one where the entire Justice League cast is assembled in a Flashpoint example. We get touching pictures and say goodbye to the legend. After all, we will definitely be saying goodbye. Not forever! While our world isn't perfect, the DC experience shows that the James Gunn universe is slim and ironclad only on paper. The same Henry Cavill was already fired in 2017, only to return in 5 years. It's not illusory to see a scenario where Gunn's Superman collects $100 million at the box office, fails at critics, and the director, along with his reboot, gets kicked out to the cold, as has happened 1,000 times before. After Snyder, there was Jeff Jones and Walter Hamada and The Rock, but they all suffered the same fate: dismissal after their first failure. The difference in the current situation is that absolutely everyone now understands who will be next after Gunn. It's obvious even to WB management that the alleged failures of the Zack Snyder era are nothing more than a media story and saboteurs within the studio who cut his films. Yes, not watchable condition. It just so happens that Gunn is already taken, and there's not much to go on. However, this in no way cancels the virtually inevitable if the Warner Brothers bosses change again in the foreseeable future, and the universe is rebooted again. Snyder will be back, and it's only a matter of time. Well, for now, let's wait until the end of April and hope that the news can actually surprise us. And do you have your own theories about possible announcements? Share them in the comments.